I heard this recently and I love the term. Fire is as natural as rain. Like we live in an environment that's adapted to fire and it needs fire. And really the catastrophic fires that we see today are the consequence of not allowing the fire that's supposed to be there.
Hey, welcome to Beyond Organic Wine. Thanks so much for listening. I'm Adam Huss, and a huge thank you to everyone who subscribes to beyondorganicwine.substack.com and supports this ecological approach to wine. It's amazing what happens when you start to look at wine from the ground up instead of from the glass down. It revolutionizes everything about the way that you see the dominant approach to wine. And that's what Beyond Organic Wine is all about. And because of this inverted perspective, I was actually considering naming my soon-to-be-released book The Upside Down Vineyard, which I thought was a really clever name, and it kind of does capture that inverted perspective. But it turns out it's even more revolutionary than that once you get that vision. When you flip that vision, as you'll read in the book, even the idea of a vineyard is one of the limitations that we can move beyond in an ecological perspective. So I named the book instead Wine Liberated, The Ecological Revolution and the Vintner's Inspiring Change. And it's available to pre-order now, pretty much anywhere you buy books, though I'll include a link to bookshop.org because it supports independent bookstores, though you'll have to use another bookseller if you're outside of the US. My guest for this episode is Eric Mayer of Napachar, and this episode is all about biochar. After Eric earned a PhD in environmental engineering from Stanford University, he went looking for a more immediate way to alleviate the climate crisis. When he learned biochar's potential for rapidly scalable carbon sequestration and the simple technologies already developed for on-site biochar production, Eric founded the Biochar as a Service company, Napachar. He counts Kelpie Wilson, the inventor of the Ring of Fire, as a mentor and inspiration. And he continues to operate Napachar in the vineyards and forests of Napa and Sonoma, California, diverting pulled vines, vine prunings, and forestry slash from burn piles to bake in flame-capped biochar kilns, returning quote-unquote waste carbon to the soil. Beginning in the spring of 2026, Eric returned to Stanford in a postdoctoral position with the mission of ending catastrophic wildfire in fire-adapted forests by making biochar. There are many places you can buy biochar to apply as another input into the vineyard, and these are fine and helpful, but I decided to talk to Eric about Napachar because he doesn't give you an input, he teaches you how to make biochar for yourself, potentially losing you as a client. But that's because he's doing this to make positive change rather than to make a bunch of money. He says his plan for scaling is to scale out. In other words, he sees himself as reaping the greater benefit of a world that has an appropriate relationship to fire on the landscape. And he wants everybody to know what he knows and be able to do this for themselves. This is a deep dive into the science and practice of biochar. Eric even presents an incredible idea about how we can use animals and birds to help us spread activated biochar throughout our landscape. Most of this interview is available only for paid subscribers to the Beyond Organic Wine Substack. Enjoy. Eric, welcome. Thanks for coming on Beyond Organic Wine. I really appreciate it.
Oh my God, my pleasure. Yeah.
And could you introduce yourself and what you do?
Sure. I'm Eric Mayer. My wife and I started a biochar company, Napachar, in 2022 with a defensible space guy. And pretty quickly we transitioned into making biochar for vineyards on site. So
Nice.
we're kind of a biochar as a service. I mean, we're coming from the Silicon Valley area, so we we took that software as a service thing and made it much more tactile. So we're biochar as a service. We find landowners who have wood and want biochar. That's basically our niche.
Fabulous. Yeah. So this, like I was saying, I don't know that I've ever dedicated an episode to biochar, but it has been something that I've had personal experience with, not, scientific trials, but I I've used it extensively in developing my soil health at where I lived in Los Angeles, and the results were pretty phenomenal. Now, like, did I have a test? Like a control
Right.
plot? No, no, I did not. But the health and vigor and like the drought tolerance of that soil, and I say of that soil because, like, I mean
Yeah.
the whole community of plants that is growing out of that soil. Just I started dry farming everything, other than like
Yeah.
tomatoes and peppers that I was growing in boxes, but the vines and even the cover crop wouldn't get watered and would be green in October, in
Oh my
California.
God.
And so and massively productive. Like, I just, instead of pruning, I owned 3 machetes because it was just so ridiculous. Like, it's like, yeah, I could go through and but it was more, it's like, just might as well use a machete because it was that kind of growth. So
Wow.
I, a little too vigorous for quality wine grapes, perhaps very
Right.
vegetative, but I also used massive amounts. I did, like, as I developed my soil, I was using all the prunings and building these big burn piles. And then when I converted the backyard to more of a perennial space with vines growing from garden boxes, I burnt all the garden boxes, which were just pine, 2x4s,
Huh. Oh,
and then
cool.
I like dug a big hole, burnt most of
Yeah.
it. I mean, I saved some of the best wood, but a lot of it was termite eaten. So I burnt the termite eaten pieces, and in that big same pit, all these scraps. I mean, all the prunings from a whole year
Right.
of like tree pruning and stuff like that. And so I mean, yeah, I mean, you're going to tell us how much we actually need, and I think I probably, you could multiply that times 100, and that's what I put in my small little area.
Yeah. That sounds
um,
like my backyard garden too.
so maybe that has something to do with what the results that I'm getting.
Well, I
Um,
mean, hey, you proved that you can use biochar as a growing medium.
Yes. Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, for real, I mean, I don't know what percentage. I'm just going to make it up, but I wouldn't be shocked if 10% of my soil was biochar at some
Right.
point, which is way a lot. But yeah, I mean, phenomenal, phenomenal. It certainly didn't hurt the growth of anything. And honestly, I am, for a place that is very prone to powdery mildew, because we kind of have a coastal climate there. We were within like 9 miles of the beach, and it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of perfect temperature year round, not too hot, not too cold for powdery mildew. It was remarkable how well even my vinifera vines did in most years. I mean, there were some very significant bad years, but that was not in the biochar part. But in the biochar area, growing Italian varieties, and even though they are, often we associate high vigor in vines with more proneness to mildews like that,
Right.
because there's just more moisture, more everything, more tissue for the powdery mildew infect. But this was remarkably, I mean, it could be partly varietally dependent. I was using Narodavila and Sangiovese. Anyway, I'm giving my whole background to this, but
Yeah.
I'm just thinking out loud that perhaps the health and resilience that the soil infused with the biochar infused soil might have given those vines like the best chance. Because I mean, I really wasn't spraying too much either. So that's the other
Right.
thing. So did I lose fruit to powdery mildew? Yes, but not like all I would have to do to stop it would be to pull leaves and let sun get on the grapes. And so maybe
Yeah.
what I should say is, have you done any studies? I mean, I know there's like fertility. I know there's like water holding capacity, and we're going to get into that. But are there any studies about like just the health of the vine and its ability to withstand disease, if we're talking specifically about vineyards, because you work in vineyards,
Right.
or any other plants, since you probably have did
I
studies from all different types of agriculture with biochar.
There are certainly studies showing that that biochar in soil results in a more microbially diverse soil,
Uh-huh.
and then that a healthy living soil results in a more resilient plant. That's kind of what I took away from what I've learned from John Kemp.
Right, right.
The photosynthetic triangle, or I think he has a new term for it now, but that pyramid. Uh, so, I mean, for example, in my backyard, I only get maybe 4 hours of sunlight, and I'm still able to have tomatoes growing, which is silly. But
Wow.
my interpretation of that is because I have such healthy soil, the plant is able to make the most of those 4 hours of sunlight and produce some sugar still.
That's
Um,
amazing. Okay.
yeah. So, and there are also studies. Well, I guess when you have a diverse um, uh, population of microbes in your soil, you're less likely to have one get out of hand, and so you don't have those hospital diseases of
Mm.
I don't know, the fungi that ruin vineyards, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, you say
Um,
hospital diseases because it's sort of like if you create too sterile of a medium, then you don't have any sort of balancing microorganisms to compete
right.
against these
Yeah.
things that parasitize our crops.
That's it. That's it. I mean, in natural winemaking, that's kind of the idea too, right? Like you have a really great uh, crop, and um, yeah,
That's great.
it's
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No,
yeah,
you give all. Yeah, you're not trying to eliminate bad things. You're trying to just like host an environment that ends up leaning in the direction of all the things that you want in terms of flavor
yeah,
and stuff like that
some
from the microbes.
equilibrium. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
um,
That's really yeah.
yeah,
So no direct studies, but at least there's some. We could lean in that direction in terms of maybe we can look at that eventually. Somebody could do a study about
yeah.
that,
No,
but
there is, the longest running study, I think, of biochar use in the vineyard started in 2009 in
okay.
Italy.
Okay.
And they've been following up on that ever since. And some of the more recent papers have shown just um, the progression of the microbial community towards a much more well balanced, um, community. So there's definitely research, even specifically for grape growing, that shows this effect of, I mean, just homeostasis and equilibrium, and um,
Yeah.
yeah, and really, like, the idea to regenerative agriculture is that you're growing your soil, you're getting a nice, healthy soil that is resilient and ready to respond to all the different stresses, and
Right.
I view biochar as just a small part of that story. I mean, biochar very generally, it I don't think it's a great mystery why it's so great in the soil, because kind of the corollary to life on Earth, like life on Earth is photosynthesis, and photosynthesis is separating carbon dioxide into some solid carbon form and free oxygen, which means as soon as you have photosynthesis, you have the conditions for fire. Which is when you heat up these carbon things around free oxygen and reform carbon dioxide. And whenever you have fire in a non-controlled environment, you're going to have partial combustion. And biochar is really the result of partial combustion. Like when things burn, first they dehydrate, then they shoot off volatile gases, which make flames. And during that time, the flames are protecting the hard carbon from oxygen. So it's pyrolyzing. That's the technical term for making biochar, heating stuff up in the relative absence of oxygen so that it itself can't combust. That's what's happening when something's burning inside a flame. Um, and then if you somehow cool down that stuff that was heating up inside the flame before oxygen can get to it itself, you have biochar, which is another way of saying you have partial combustion. So in other words, life on Earth implies biochar. And so soils on Earth have always had this input of biochar into them. And so, of course, they've, created processes that kind of depend on this pyrogenic carbon.
And I mean, just to cover some basics before we jump in, because I find myself wanting to ask you a bunch of nitty gritty questions already. But can we just give an overview of like what biochar is in relation to like why is it different from charcoal or
Sure.
anything like that? And yeah, and anything like just sort of an overview of the thinking around why this thing is now a thing that you are doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, let's see. In relation to charcoal, charcoal in English is kind of a catch-all term for carbon that was heated up in the absence of oxygen. So biochar counts as charcoal. Um, cooking charcoal counts as charcoal. Um, activated the activated charcoal, the stuff you'd take in a pill if you've got toxins in your belly to absorb them. That's charcoal. So they're all under this kind of this big umbrella of charcoal, and then the differences have to do with the exact conditions under which you made it. So like cooking. Let me back up. Going back to what it means to combust something. I think if you get a clear picture of this, and you can easily separate all the charcoals into their camps. So
Great.
as you're warming stuff up, uh, so we're starting with let's say we're going to focus only on the woody feedstocks, only things like grapevines and branches and trees and lignin, things that have lignin in them. As a side note, you can pyrolyze anything that's biogenic, that's carbon based, and make a type of biochar with it. So there's like chicken manure biochar and chicken
Oh,
bone biochar, and um, yeah, there's a
okay.
lot of interest in all of that, but that's not my specialty. So let's just look at wood and what happens when you burn wood. So like I said, first it dehydrates and then it devolatilizes. And so the devolatilizing in like the structure of lignin, you've got a bunch of, they're called aromatic rings of carbon. There are these hexagons of carbon atoms all bound up. And then there are lots of other things connecting them in this lignin form that are made of O's and H oxygens and hydrogens and other and so as you heat them up, those O's and H's, those are what are volatilizing away. They're, I mean, literally like hydrocarbons is hydrogen and carbon.
Yeah.
So they're escaping as gases, and those gases are volatile. So if oxygen gets to them and they're hot, they make flame. So that's the flamey part of combustion.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and so you can kind of picture as you're doing that the aromatic rings of carbon are hanging around and they're losing those molecules in between and combining and finding themselves. And when two aromatic rings of carbon find each other, they make an even tighter bond.
Mm.
Um, that's it's it takes too much energy for most microbes to break that bond. Um, so they become a stable form of carbon.
Got it.
Um, so basically, the spectrum of charcoal goes from barely devolatilized, so it still has the potential to shoot out flames, through to like fully devolatilized. And then if you keep on heating it even hotter, you drive off everything, and the carbon will actually find itself into something like graphene, like a graphitic sheet.
Wow.
Um,
Okay.
so cooking charcoal, you still kind of want some heating potential from that. Maybe you even want some flavor, some like smokiness. And so those are the
Right.
volatiles that you're asking to still be around. So cooking charcoal, like when you go and buy lump charcoal, hardwood lump charcoal that still kind of looks like wood,
Yeah.
that's probably been heated up to like 350, 400 degrees Celsius.
Yeah.
Embarrassingly, even though like my lived experience is all in Fahrenheit, I really only know biochar stuff in Celsius. I think that's around like 800 Fahrenheit, maybe.
Okay.
Um, biochar, well, flame carbonized biochar. So the way we make it, the way you're making it when you dig a pit, um, that's flames themselves are like 200 degrees Celsius, at least adiabatic temperatures. In the real environment, they're slightly cooler, but very hot, hotter than 350 Celsius. So the temperature that the char forms in a flamey combustion is quite hot. We've measured the char itself forming at 600 to 700 degrees Celsius. Sometimes I can measure it up at 900. We're not getting into the super hot, like 2000 degrees is hot enough. You actually make graphene, or
Got
it
it.
might be graphite. Anyway, really, really, really tightly bound carbon. So
Got it.
biochar is different than cooking charcoal in that it's made at a higher temperature, or at least this flamey combustion biochar that we make is made at a higher temperature and has no volatiles left. And in the biochar literature, you can look, there will be, if you get like a lab report on your biochar, the two numbers you're really looking at are like the carbon content and the H to C ratio, the hydrogen to carbon ratio, which is literally a measure of how much you've devolatilized it, how many of the hydrogens you've driven off.
Huh.
So cooking charcoal will be up at, I don't know, 0.8, 0.7. To be called biochar, it has to be lower than 0.7, according to the International Biochar Initiative, IBI.
How do you know if
you send it to a lab?
Oh, okay.
But I mean, that's not true. If I mean, you as a layperson, me in the field, when we're making flamey combustion biochar, we know that we've devolatilized when there are no more flames.
Okay.
Because the flames are made by the volatiles coming out. So when you have a campfire and you get to the end and the flames flicker out, you can be pretty well sure that you've driven off most of the volatiles. And so if you cool that campfire down, then the black pieces left behind are going to be high temperature wood biochar. And there are some other tests you can do then as a person in the field. If you pick up that black piece once it's cool and smell it, it shouldn't smell like anything because the volatiles are the source of the smell. And you should be able to crumble it because the volatiles are also, those H's and O's are the connecting pieces between the aromatic rings that give the lignin its strength. And once you've driven them off, it should be crumbly.
Yeah, I mean, I can attest. I am holding this little jar of biochar that you gave me, and it's been sealed with a cork, and I pop the cork, and no smell, like not a smoky smell at all.
That's good. I didn't give you a bad batch.
So why what's the big deal about biochar? I mean, like, why would we want to do that? The rest of this episode is available for paid subscribers to the Beyond Organic Wine Substack at beyondorganicwine.substack.com. Please consider becoming a paid subscriber so that you can get full access to all the content at Beyond Organic Wine, and maybe more importantly, support the work of Beyond Organic Wine in an ecological perspective on wine. Thank you.